I don't have a mic, so then if I'm walking around over here, real animated, like they're not gonna be able to pick it up, right?
We'll just have to be.
We're gonna. I mean, okay, they're not here. It's their fault. Just saying. What? Inception. What?
I'm gonna have to go over there to speak. Maybe I'll speak really loud. Anyway, welcome to the Wisconsin.net user group. Today we're having a meeting to talk about behind the scenes .NET demo app. We have an in-room audience here, so next time if you can show up in person, I would really love to see a network with you. So that's a plug to get back out of the your house and to visit us in meetings like we used to. So welcome. Today we have a talk by David Pine. He's going to do, well, you can see here, it's going to be Microsoft Build. So at this point, I think we covered everything. So David, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here. So this is Microsoft Build behind the demo app that is .NET. And if you don't know me, I'm David Pine. Check out my website, davidpine.net, where I talk about all sorts of cool, fun stuff, all sorts of tech. I'm required to put like a little boring bits about me. I'll go fast. I'm part of DevRel at Microsoft, so developer relations. I like saying developer relations. Really, I work in content, so I'm helping build out the .NET content site. So if you've ever visited and done any searching for like C# or .NET or ASP.NET Core, things of that nature, I help write that content. Published author. I brought a copy of my book today, which we'll be raffling off at the end to give to somebody, and I will sign it for them. Also, I'm the host of On.NET Live, which is a TV stream from the .NET team. Google developer expert, Twilio champion, 2-time Microsoft MVP, open source developer, all that fun stuff. Cream City code organizer. So we haven't done that in a long time. That was pretty much because of COVID, but has anyone ever attended Cream City Code? Yay, awesome, that's cool. Cool, enough about me. So the reason we're here, I wanna talk through like the basis of this story that just like the last 6 months of my life at Microsoft and what's been going on there. So there was a lot of excitement around this new thing. You may or may not have heard of it. OpenAI kind of made a splash, and it made such a big impact in our day-to-day that essentially everyone was scrambling to figure out how we could ingest it, how we could use it. Why was it going to be relevant? How is it going to be important to our day-to-days? How can we become more productive developers? And I was super excited by it. And you know, the birth of ChatGPT really changed how we see or evaluate AI. Like before ChatGPT, there was this moment where AI was kind of just like a little toy thing. And some people still argue that it is, right? And that's, you know, not entirely unjustifiable. But we can all agree that there's this huge elephant in the room, and this is going to have some sort of impact in all of our lives in one way, shape, or another. So when it hit the market running, you may or may not have heard this, but within the first 5 days, ChatGPT had 1 million users. Within 2 months, it had 100 million users. Now, to put that into scale, TikTok, if you have kids, you're probably familiar with TikTok. It took them 9 months to get to 100 million users. So this is like leaps and bounds, and this is just some nerdy technology. Like it's a chatbot essentially, right? So why is this so, you know, why is this having such a huge impact? So Microsoft caught wind of this, right? And we've been partnering with them now for a while, but there was some bigger agreements that have been made. And now we can have OpenAI in, you know, some other places. So 2 times a year, Microsoft has a hackathon, and it's the entire company. So every single employee at Microsoft, 120 some thousand people, are encouraged to take a week and participate in this hackathon. And lots of times the ideas that come out of these hackathons end up becoming like actual products that we ship to customers, right? So I was really excited by all the OpenAI hype. And has anyone else been playing with it or been hyped up by it? Looked at it? Just another tool in the toolbox, whatever. So there was this hackathon, and I started writing an OpenAI .NET SDK, right? An HTTP client wrapper that would call into their APIs, and they've got great documentation on it. So I was like, it's pretty simple to make these things. Anyone can make a client. So I started making the client, and some of my peers caught wind of it, and they're like, oh, well, Azure, they already are doing this in-house. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. So we were literally making some of the same things, and I was like, that's kind of cool. So they started having me interface with the .NET SDK team that manages the Azure bits for OpenAI. And I was providing them feedback. And at the time, their SDK only had a couple hundred downloads, and it's still in preview. But I was helping to influence how they were going to do it, and make sure that it represented .NET in a good way. So I started consuming it, and my hackathon led to a proposal for, if you've ever visited the docs site, like learn.microsoft.com, it's one of the world's largest static websites. It's huge. There's literally tens of thousands of articles on there, and it covers nearly every single Microsoft product that exists. And we've got a team of about 200 different writers that are constantly, every single day, writing and churning and interacting with people all around the world. And the website gets roughly 100 million page views a month. So it's pretty active. But there's this gap. And during this hackathon, I identified a gap in all of the static content. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could use OpenAI and not just as a generalist, but actually take OpenAI and train a model specifically to learn all of Microsoft's tech and all of our competitors' tech, and just basically be like a coding guru. And they said it was a terrible idea. And then a month later, there's a team that's dedicated to doing that same thing. I just didn't get credit for it. So it's cool. It's their idea, right? So I'm not bitter at all about that. But we have these other things that are called half days of learning. So during the half days of learning, I'm always heads down, getting my feet wet with other, bleeding technology, working with whatever the latest, greatest tech is, and just having fun. So as part of one of the half days of learning, I wrote a Blazor WebAssembly app. And that's been a passion of mine, writing Blazor WebAssembly apps for a while. So I wrote an app, and I started to use the Azure OpenAI .NET SDK that they were shipping. And I started providing them feedback and saying these things that I observed and whatnot. And one of the PMs on the .NET team caught wind of it. And out of the blue on Teams, they called me up, and they're like, do you have a minute to show us what you did? And I said, well, I guess, not a big deal. I'll show you. And I demoed it to them, and they were like amazed. They were like shocked that a content developer, someone who's writing docs on their side, would just be excited enough to go off and write a full end-to-end application that's featuring all these preview technologies. And they're like, we want this. This is the stuff that we are looking for. We want these end-to-end stories of .NET developers being successful with the tool set and the tool offerings, all the frameworks, services, everything, right? So they're like, would you want to go to build and be the demo lead to show this off at the keynote? And I was like, what? I was beside myself. I couldn't believe it. So 4 months later, I'm heads down writing the app, working with them, working with actually some of the distinguished engineers at Microsoft, like the level 80 folks that are just mind-blowing. And it's very humbling. But unfortunately, there was no travel budget. And I had other obligations around that time with kids. So I was unable to be the demo lead. But part of the demo ended up being, it transitioned several different times, as you can expect. Everyone's under the crunch to get things ready for build. But I've got several shout outs during build, so that made me feel kind of better from some of the people, and my app was used in various parts of it. So I'm excited by that. So it's kind of cool to see that all come together and to fruition. So one thing to call attention to is, if you've seen .NET Conf from 2022, this is the .NET Podcast app. And it's a beautiful application, right? This is one of the end-to-end scenario apps that they have built out that really make the product offering shine. I like to think it looks really nice. I was totally disheartened when I discovered and learned, and you may not know this, that Microsoft didn't actually write this app. They outsource it. They hire this company in Seattle called Plain Concepts, and they've got a great design team, but they write questionable code because I looked at it and it wasn't great. But I helped contribute to it, and there's lots of really cool things that came out of this. It kind of does show off some of the ways that you can blend the different technologies, like with Maui, and have different client scenarios. But I say that to say that we're leaning towards starting to build a lot more of our demo apps in-house, and I like to think that I'm helping influence that. So the demo app that I'm going to show you is built again using .NET, C#, and Blazor. And since we're a smaller crowd, I'd love it if when I'm going through this and showing you, if you've got questions or if something doesn't make sense, this is for you. So by all means, stop me, ask questions. There are no stupid questions. The only stupid question is a question that's not asked. So let's jump into the demo. And then I am going to share, actually, that's over there now. So I can do, I don't have a mouse. Give me a second. Oh, the mouse is way over there. It's like, why is it not exiting? Now, if I move this over there, ta-da. And that shows up over there, right? You can see it on the StreamYard. Perfect. Okay. Let me see if I can. Is that like okay-ish? You guys can see? Okay. So the thing is, I can't really. So I'm going to position myself this way real quick. All right. So when we're looking at this application, we have a client and a server and some shared bits. And we've got our tests right here alongside, which are end-to-end tests. So this is Playwright. So let's just start with the boring parts, which are the shared models. And I say boring, even though this is one of the huge exciting things about Blazor. So who's a JavaScript developer? Show of hands. No one? Wrote some JavaScript?
Not primarily.
Not primarily. Who interfaces with JavaScript developers? So, okay. So if you are working with JavaScript developers, is the backend a different technology than JavaScript? Is not Node.js. It's like .NET or Java or Python, whatever, some other technology, right? So there's this phrase that I've came up with. It's in my book. I'm probably forgetting what it's called. This is really bad if I can't remember a phrase I made up. But basically, it's the sense of becoming fatigued by trying to constantly keep up to date the shapes of models between the server and the consuming client, right? Whatever that client may be. Because especially if they're different technologies, right? If one's JavaScript and one's .NET, you have the shape of this model. If this model changes, then you have to go update your code over in there. Otherwise, things are not going to work, right? When it's serialized over the wire, what happens? You might be missing stuff, or it might be malformed, or whatever, right? It's not great. So one of the cool things with Blazor is you can share the models, meaning that your server and your client have identical models so that you know for sure it's serialized across the wire both ways without concern ever. So we've got various record classes. This is the Azure culture. It's pretty straightforward, pretty boring. We've got a chat prompt, which just has a string for a prompt. We've got some defaults that are shared for serialization. This is the recommended way to do serialization options with the system text JSON. You want to make sure that you've got a static shared instance of that. It's actually quite a performance hit to instantiate one of these every single time if you're calling into any of the overloads with custom options. So make sure you share one. There are language directions, and some of this stuff's not going to make sense until we get into a little bit further. Shared cultures, don't worry about that. But then this is the response. So we've got on one end, we're going to have a chat prompt. So a prompt, which is just a string text. And then we're going to have a tokenized response, which is just going to return the content for the response. Pretty straightforward, literally one property each. So the server is a little bit more fun. So the server, we're going to look at the server packages, and we're using several different things here. So we've got the Azure.AI.OpenAI. Now, one thing to note is cognitive services, when they're offering OpenAI, they're offering it kind of two different ways. So it's essentially opaque. So if you are already a customer of OpenAI, using it through Azure is actually the exact same cost as what it would be to use it through OpenAI. Obviously, they want you to use Azure, so that's why they're going to make that available. But then you get the AI Studio through Azure, which is actually really compelling. There's a lot of really neat management things there with it. You get managed SDKs with updates, and one of the neat things is I helped influence. They have a streaming API, which I feature in this app. So we're going to look at that. But then we just have a few other things here like caching, and then we're making our internals visible to our end-to-end tests, and we've got our project references, which is pretty straightforward. So the program, again, super exciting stuff here. Let me zoom in on this a little bit. So this is, show of hands, who's been using the minimal APIs? You liking them so far?
Yeah, I do a lot of Python too, and it's very similar to doing the Python stuff.
Awesome, perfect. I've been, well, actually, one of the apps I worked on just recently, I was porting from Python to .NET, and I was using ChatGPT to help me learn Python. But it's interesting because Python's really taught a lot in schools, and .NET isn't. So it's, but yeah, we're trying to simplify things. So from here, we've got a web application. We say create builder, given our args, and then we have this builder thing, and we can, add things to it and then configure it and then run it is essentially what it comes down to. So I like to organize these into extensions. So I'm going to just pin this here. If you're a C# developer, you're probably familiar with the notion of partial classes. So when you use a top level C# program like this, behind the scenes, what it actually does is it creates a program class that is partial. And they did that on purpose because they figured people would be doing other partial bits with it. So if I expand this, you can see I've got program.build CS, and this is a public partial class program. And I've got this static method here that takes, the web application builder, and it configures all the things in here that I want to configure. So we're adding Azure OpenAI, we're doing Swagger Gen, we've got our HTTP client, we've got our logging, we're mapping our endpoints, we're adding memory cache, controller with views, and razor pages, and then we're finally building it and returning it. And that was returning back to main, but we also have this configure. So we're going to take the app and configure it. So if we're in development, we're going to treat things slightly differently. Otherwise, production mode, we're going to use different exception handlers and things like that. But this is, again, all very standard. Now, where things start to deviate from the norm is we've got an extension method here that says map Azure OpenAI API, which is a mouthful, admittedly. But this is just an extension method that I wrote that sits here in our Solution Explorer under extensions. And it walks up to the iEndpoint route builder. And from there, it's going to map a group. So groups are nice because it lets you kind of build cohesive things together and group them. And then you can append different things and build out like your endpoint in a proper way. So we're going to say the prefix is API OpenAI. So from this, we can then map a post to chat. And then we can define our handler. And this handler supports dependency injection. So the framework is intelligent enough to know that all of the previously aforementioned services that we were adding before are going to be resolvable and materialized when this method is called. And this method just sits right here. And it's a static async async enumerable. And this is one of the streaming responses. So async enumerable it's kind of a special type. Has anyone used async enumerable as a return type before? Have you used task before? So it's similar in that you can await it, but this you can actually await in a for each loop. So it's a little bit different that way. but it kind of conjoins two concepts. So have you used IEnumerable before as well? So IEnumerable lets you do deferred execution, right? Where you can build up your queries and not actually run those queries on your objects in memory until you need to materialize them. Now, when you're doing task-based programming, it's similar, but the execution of your program actually is suspended for a second. So it's basically deferred execution plus suspended execution. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take our OpenAI client. This is coming from dependency injection. The chat prompt, this is the object that was shared that we were talking about before. So this is actually bound from the caller. So basically the runtime is going to provide this to us. It's one of the arguments that's being passed into the body of the post to this endpoint. And then we just get the configuration. So from there, we've got our deployment ID, and then we walk up to the client, and then the client says get chat completions streaming async, and we give it the deployment ID. So the deployment ID is essentially the model that we've configured from Azure Studio for our OpenAI instance. So since we're hosting OpenAI in Azure, we have a number of models that are already predefined, like GPT 3.5 Turbo, GPT-4, or the DaVinci Code, DaVinci Text. There's like 30 of them that are available right now, and they're adding more constantly. But beyond that, you can actually configure your own and train your own, and this is how you would kind of point to the one you want to use. So then we instantiate some chat completion options, and this is where things get really fun, because what you can do, you might see where I'm going with this, is you can start to define chat messages. So these aren't just the messages that we're prompting the endpoint to respond to. This is essentially baking in intelligence into the conversation we're about to have with this bot. So what we can say is this chat message has the chat role of system. And one of the contents for this is that you're an AI assistant for developers, helping them write code more efficiently. Your name is Blazor Clippy. So I'm basically telling this bot, you're going to take on this persona. For our conversation, you are going to be Blazor Clippy. And when you respond, you're going to always respond with Markdown, right? So then, and we say, here's a user, and we say, oh, in this conversation, the user says, oh, what's your name? And an example, the assistant would respond with, hi, my name is Blazor Clippy. Nice to meet you. Smiling emoji. And notice that the 2 asterisks are here. So that's making that bold, because that's in Markdown how you would do that. But those are just basically example transactions for the conversation to have context and to see, so that every time we're talking to it, it knows it can take on this persona and it knows how to respond. So then we say, here's the next question from the user, given whatever prompt the client is actually asking for, right? So does that make sense? So we get our response, and we've got various completions. And then from there, we can say, give us our streaming choices. And then from those streaming choices, give us our messages that are streaming. And then we're going to notice how we're using await for each, yield return. And this is in the context of an asynchronous call. So again, async enumerable. And this is a tokenized response. So this is just a little blip of the content being returned. So that's pretty much it for the minimal API. That's the server. And again, this API is also going to host the client-side app. So the client-side app gets a little bit more fun. So has anyone here played with Blazor WebAssembly? Show of hands. Oh my gosh, not too many. That's not disheartening at all. No, it does make me feel better. All right. So just like any other .NET application, you have program with the main entry point. This is, again, a top-level program. So we've got our WebAssembly host builder that creates the default. We've got some root components. A lot of this stuff you don't need to worry about. This is all out of the template. We do have app states. We have our HTTP clients. And we have a few other things here that are interesting. I'm using Mud Blazor, which is a component library that exists. It's open source, it's free, and I don't work for them or anything like that, but I advocate for them because they're amazing. It's an amazing product. It's awesome. Like I said, entirely free, and it's a beautiful, beautiful UI and easy to use. But we've got an OpenAI prompt queue. So this is a custom service that I wrote that we're going to look at in a little bit. But I'm also adding session storage, speech synthesis, speech recognition, the MUD services, localization, the culture stuff. I'm doing a few bits of optimization. So like there's a few things that we could get into, like the object pool provider. We don't need to get into that. It's kind of beyond the scope of this. Just know that it helps make things faster. And then we've got our builder that's built, and then we say detect client culture. Essentially what this does is when the client app is running in the context of your browser, like the first request hits wherever the static files are, it responds with the HTML, which is a static document. In that static document, there's links and refs to various other static assets, one of which is, if it's a PWA, a progressive web app, will be a manifest of DLLs, CSS, JavaScript files, other resources to load for your app, right? So as it's doing that, it's going to pull different like actual .NET DLLs over the wire. And you can see that happen, which is pretty neat. But again, it's .NET running in the context of your browser. And this is the JS host, so JavaScript host. And one neat thing about Blazor, and not even just Blazor now, because with the JS host, it's just .NET. So .NET, the native runtime, supports bidirectional JavaScript interop. So we can define various bindings between any JavaScript object, and we could pass .NET references to it, and it can call back into .NET from JavaScript. So it's fully bidirectional. And some of these services up here that you're seeing, like the add local storage services, the add session storage, add speech synthesis, these are actually extension methods that were source generated from a side project of mine called Blazorators, where I automatically generate these bindings for you for well-known JavaScript APIs that exist. So it's pretty convenient. But what we're able to do is there's other source generator stuff that's happening within the context of that. So we've got our internal sealed partial class using all the keywords. So I've got this function here that's called scroll into view. And here's the function name, scroll into view. And the module name is the JavaScript module, this thing here. And we ask for an ID. Well, if you remember back on main, if I just do control minus, site.js is where that module is resolving from before this is ran. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. So we go to our static www root directory, look at our site.js, and in here we've got this exported function. So this function is an ES6 module. So it's a standard JavaScript module. So it's exported. So we're saying basically export this function and let whoever's going to consume it, and it's named scroll into view, and it expects an ID. So the source generator, knows how to bind these things together. So this .NET class can call scroll into view given an ID, and our .NET code will actually be invoking that module that's imported into our application. So again, bidirectional JavaScript interop. And then so there's lots of various markup bits for this. We have our shared bits, we have our services, we've got our pages and models. But before I go into that, let's just run the app real quick, and I'll show you what it looks like. Press buttons, wait for it to happen. Ready, building, it's building, I promise. Has anyone been using GitHub Copilot? Do you like it?
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Any complaints about it?
Not now, but yeah, there are a couple of things. Right.
Output, it is still building, huh? Look at that, holy smokes. Must know that we're all staring at it. Wait for it. Oh, so now it's weird. All right, it opened up over here. Let me move my mouse way over here. Grab this one, sorry. Move it over here. All right. So is that looks terrible, doesn't it? You guys, let's do a couple things. Let's do that. Make it light theme. Let's do oops. This. There we go. Full screen. Okay. So this is the landing page. And you may or may not know this, but Bing, if you go to bing.com/create, that's a link that you might want to check out. But basically, it is Dolly, the image creator. So you can basically walk up to Dolly and say, give it a phrase, any descriptive phrase, and it will generate a never before seen image that you're free to use. And that's what I did here. I don't remember exactly what I asked, but I asked for something like cool futuristic stuff. And it's like, yeah, here we go. So that's what we have. So this is an image that I decided to use as the card for the landing page. We've got various links to the GitHub repos and other stuff, which is pretty straightforward. Again, all of this UI, this is built using Mud Blazor. So all of the components that you're seeing, like the cards, the layouts, the flows, the theme aware and context switching stuff, the hamburger menu that collapses, all that stuff. I didn't have to write that. I just consumed components, which is pretty nice. And in this app, I started writing something else that was just a side thing, like the history of C#. It's got all the different features that ever existed there, all the way up to 11. So I've got plans to do more stuff on that. Again, that's completely out of scope. I don't even know why I stopped there to show you that, but I did. So interact with Blazor Clippy, hooray. So if you remember, we talked about having the ability to do natural language processing with these large language models, right? We're consuming OpenAI. And you remember seeing specifically the minimal API that we exposed. It's got that streaming endpoint where we give it a prompt and it takes on this persona of Blazor Clippy and it responds, right? So let's just go over here and let's just ask it a question. Can you explain to me bidirectional JavaScript interop with Blazor? So it heard me, put it in there. There's a typo, that's fine. It's going to understand it anyways because it's pretty smart. I'm going to send it off. What it's going to do is it's going to zip over to the Azure OpenAI instance. It's going to have all that message context up front. So it built out like the persona of Blazor Clippy, and it's going to stream the response back. So this response is being rendered in real time coming from Blazor Clippy. Notice one thing. This is also instructing, we instructed it to come back in Markdown. So when it comes back in Markdown, I'll stop it. But you get the point, right? So that's me using my voice to communicate with this thing, and then it's reading it back to me, streaming it in real time, rendering the markdown as actually HTML that's then sanitized and splatted onto your screen. And that's a pretty simple thing to do. It's not very hard.
Saving any of the context information about it, so if you'd ask like a follow-up question.
That's a really good question. No, it's not. But that's not to say you couldn't change that. So it's at your discretion. If your app wants to decide to do that, I would encourage you having some sort of privacy thing so people know about it, just like anything else. But no, everything's just thrown on the ground afterwards. But so I say all of this to say that this app was the app that I wrote on a half day of learning and to show off some fun stuff that you can do with Blazor. And let me pull this up real quick, minimize this, pull this back up. Now, I keep trying to click over here off that. That doesn't work. All right. So let me go back to this and show you the fun. Come on. Oh. It's really throwing me off. I keep clicking on the StreamYard image of my screen and it's not working. Okay, so the service that I completely omitted before was the OpenAI prompt queue. And this is the part that's, I think, the fun part for the client bits. Well, this is going to drive me nuts. Let me fix this real quick. Remove unnecessary usings. Yes. In the solution, if there are any. Just here. Okay. Okay. So this is a service that I registered and wrote. Essentially what it does is it pulls in and requires the iService provider. So for the client, it's going to have all these different services that are available to it. And since I'm calling in the provider, I can explicitly capture a scope and resolve services as need be. Typically, you wouldn't pull in the provider, you'd pull in just the client itself. But there are different scopes. So this is actually the correct way to do it. So we've got our constructor, and then we've got our enqueue function. So the enqueue function is void returning. So it returns immediately after they call it, which is fine because we're just essentially enqueuing it, and then that's it. So they get a prompt, and then they define a handler, which is a function that returns the prompt response, and it's asynchronous. So if our local prompt task is not null, that means it's already been enqueued and working, we'll just return. Otherwise, we say task.run, and this is the builder stuff. I know I said it was kind of out of scope, but I'll just explain it briefly really quick. You can use object pool providers to optimize things that you might tear down and instantiate in tight loops. For example, string builders, they always say, don't concatenate strings, use a string builder because it's more optimal. That's great. But if you're in a tight loop and you're instantiating a bunch of string builders, that's an anti-pattern. So you want to have a pool provider that you'll get it from instead, so that you can release it afterwards and then just have a finite number and share those. All right, so we're going to create our scope. So we've got our scope from our provider. And then from there, we're going to ask for, it's over here, an HTTP client. We have our client. We've got our shared options. And we instantiate our prompt given the prompt text. We turn that into JSON. And it's represented as string content. And this is all very, very common HTTP client stuff. And then this is where we're actually posting to that API OpenAI chat given the body. And then we ensure that our response is valid. And if it is, awesome. Then we're actually going to use a stream. So we're going to read the response as a stream. And when that stream comes over the wire, we can actually call await for each again. And this took me forever to find out. I actually worked with Stephen Tobe. He's the one that told me about this API because it is not very well documented, and I didn't know it existed. But if you recall, our server's got that beautiful API. Well, how the heck are we supposed to consume that on the client if we don't have like a matching iasync enumerable consumer? There is one. It's called JSON serializer, deserialize async enumerable given a stream, right? Well, that's really intuitive, but no one else really knew about it. So I'm using it, and it works perfectly. So there's a bit of normalization that has to happen with the responses, because one thing I noticed that's great is OpenAI between turns will change line endings, will change special characters. They don't care. Their responses are not normalized whatsoever. And that's something to keep in your mind if you're ever consuming those APIs. So we normalize a few bits of it. We have our text, and then we pass it back to the handler. And as you might imagine, the page that was asking for these things and registered after the send, it handles and updates all of its bindings, and then you get the beautiful rendering of the stuff coming back, which is, I think, pretty cool, pretty powerful. So that is, let me see where we are now. So that's the demo app, or the app that I wrote on the half day of learning that inspired the .NET PM to have me start working on what they were going to use for build. So build has this live demo, which I will pull up now. Again, I'm doing the mouse over here. Let me pull it up. It's not this one. What is this one? It's not even anything. Give me a second. This one? Nope. Too many windows. All right, let me close a few things. What if I just, here we go. Okay. Whew. All right. So this may look familiar because again, it was based on the same thing. Do you guys prefer the dark theme or the light theme? Any preferences?
I like the dark.
I do too. True developer over it. No. All right. So the design team wanted me to add to the card a canvas and have more images to show off more of the cool Bing Dolly generation stuff, which is neat. And again, I encourage you to check that out. It's pretty fun. Let me actually pull up this. Is this okay? Trying to find my mouse. So you saw and you remember the video chat. That's the same bits that we had from the original app, but it's Microsoft, right? So what would Microsoft want? They would want to connect not with the fun bits of, oh, Blazor Clippy, plan words, ha, ha, ha. They think enterprise. They think big picture. They think what's practical? What are developers actually going to want to use to help improve their, the lives of their customers? What are they going to do to, make money? So enter the boring business part. That's how I like to call it. I don't think it's actually called the boring business part, but that's what we'll think of it as. So essentially what we did was we want you, the consumer of this demo app, to get in the mindset that you're an employee for a company and you want to figure out what the benefits are. So you might go to like some SharePoint site, or you might open up some PDFs, or you might, how would you typically find out your benefits, right? There's some sort of dedicated website for it. Well, what we've done is we took a bunch of PDFs, sample PDFs of this company, and we used form recognizer, so cognitive services. We scanned all of them. We used all of that semantic understandings to then index it into Azure search. So then we can build queries to find relevant keywords and extract that information at any point in time we need. And we take those bits of contextual information, and we then feed it into OpenAI to say, given this additional context, much like we saw how we were building up chat messages to get the thing into the persona of Blazor Clippy, we can do that with like tons of data. And we can say, now that you have this understanding of all these different pieces, let's ask a question. So like what happens in a performance review? So those are some of the example questions, like what actually might happen. So let me see if I can zoom in on this real quick too. Is it Windows plus? No, Control plus. Generating response. This might take a little bit. Okay, it's awake. Okay. All right. So it has not only an answer, but it has a thought process, and it shows the various things that it used to identify how it was going to come up with the answer. And it's got supporting content again. We can look at the supporting content here because it actually has inlaid the citations. So not only does it say, all right, Azure Cognitive Search helped us find these little bits, but these are the actual PDFs where that was sourced from, right? So you can double check it. So you can click on that. This will open up the actual PDF, which shows the performance reviews, right? That's the question we asked about. So you can see very quickly how putting these things together like this, it can be really, really powerful. So getting back to this gentleman's question before about continuing the context. So this was ask a single question, like fire and forget. This one here is like more of like a conversation. So this keeps the previous context and appends it. And not only that, it's going to propose follow-up questions as well, given all that context. So we're going to say, what's included in my Northwind health plan that's not standard? Like what's a non-standard, part of this health plan that doesn't really, it kind of stands out. So it's going to generate a response super fast. Just waiting for someone to be like, this is BS. He's got his headphones on, don't worry. Come on, you can do it. One of the things that they wanted me to do was add caching for questions that have been asked, and I said no. And they're like, why? I'm like, well, what if we cache something that's invalid? And they're like, good point. I'm like, I don't want to have to add validity checks to the responses from this random thing. Like, come on. Oh, why is it not working now? It's going to make me look like a liar. All right, let's just do this. Let's just do over here. Boom. Control Shift. It works. I promise it does. Oh, I lost the internet. That's what it is. That's not what it is. All right, ask the question again. It's going to be snappier this time, I promise. I just took out like the whole eastern seaboard, like data centers are down. Okay, look how quick that was. All right, so the answer is a little bit more in depth this time. You can see we got benefits here. It's going to explain that this came from benefits options 2. It goes into the standard plan and what's not standard, what is standard, and then it's got all the citations, the thought process, supporting content, follow-up questions. So we can just click on these follow-up questions. Like, so what is the cost difference between the 2 plans? And you can see that, answers go up to the top. If we want to change the flow of that, we just simply click this right here, sort ascending versus descending. So now the answer is coming down here instead. And super fast. It's a lot faster when no one's watching. But what we'll do is we'll continue to ask some of these follow-up questions, and I'll show you the thought process, because that's pretty neat to see the entire, historical dialogue of where that additional context is coming from.
Are the follow-up questions generated from OpenAI then?
They are.
They get triggered the
Yep.
response?
Yep. So there's a bunch of templates that exist in this app that say, given these this search criteria and this context that we found from whatever the source is, here's that blah. We want you to, much like I did with like the respond with Markdown, we can tell it how we want it to reply.
Okay.
We can say talk like a pirate, and it would, or talk like Yoda. That was one of the other ideas I had. And it does a really good job at doing that. But then you can say,
Is there a threshold of those responses? Like you want 3 of those follow-ups? 5
Yeah,
of those?
exactly. You can tell it the number. You can say, I want you to give me 3 follow-up questions. That's it.
Okay.
Right. In fact, how we do the inlays for the citations is we say when you find if you find the answer in this context that we provided to you, we want you to include a reference with brackets. Later on, we'll parse out the brackets and say that's the file.
Oh, okay.
Right. So like you can instruct it to do whatever you want, except for work consistently, apparently.
Must be the guest block.
I don't know what, that's weird. It doesn't usually do that. All right, let's just close that down. Trust that it works though. And it's super cool, and I hope you check it out. I do have some links for you. But let's just do, So essentially we are already at so the resources. So so this is where you can get your phone out if you want to look at any of the QR codes that we have. The first one here, it's going to be the link in the URL to the source repo that I wrote, that is the Blazor OpenAI, the demo app that inspired Microsoft to have me help write the demo app for some of the keynotes and sessions. I'll just wait awkwardly until everyone's done. Good? Yeah. And then this is the official sample app up on Azure Samples. This is the Enterprise Edition. And one thing that you will note is this has been, this uses semantic kernel, which is a .NET SDK that's also in beta right now. And that's where they're starting to try to figure out how to stream some of these contextual bits betwixt other Azure offerings and OpenAI. And that's where you're seeing a lot of the glue between, some of those different contexts. Also, they're using Bicep to deploy, which is a language I just learned also recently, which is pretty neat. This is the QR code for Azure.AI OpenAI, and this is the .NET SDK that you saw me using. And I can post these links as comments later too to the thing, just for future reference. This is the link to the learn.microsoft.com OpenAI services. They've got a bunch of quick starts out there showing you how to get successful with using that. And This is the QR code for my book. And again, I've got one here. So without further ado, I want to say thank you to all of you folks for showing up. This is, it's kind of a special moment for me. This is my 8th time speaking at the Wisconsin.net user group. 8th time. This is my 80th talk, in-person talk giving. I've spoken all around the world. So thank you. Any questions? Any, nothing? This is perfect.